color printout of a Chinese woman in a bikini on all fours, looking back over her shoulder on the wall. That's it.
This is such an
there
aesthetic. Hello, here's this Laowinner here with another video, and I have a very special guest today. We're going to talk about some things, in particular things related to the medical sphere of China. This guy, Mattias, has a lot of experience with that, and I'm going to bring him in right now. So I want to say thank you to Mattias. Thank you for joining us today on Laowinner. Why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Well, thank you for having me here. My name is Mattias Daly. That's the full name right there for you CCTV police. If you're trying to find me, I won't make you work too hard. I am a Swedish-born U.S. New Zealand dual citizen, but I spent about just a few months shy of 10 years in China. And I've been living since then in the free nation of Taiwan, working as a translator. But while I was in China, I was actively pursuing medical studies. And so I studied for 2 years at the Shanghai University of Traditional Chinese Medicine and 4 more years at Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, which is quite relevant, I think, to some of the things that are happening in the world right now, because we studied a curriculum that was 50% or more Western, so-called Western medicine, modern medicine, and just under 50% Chinese medicine. So actually, I got a Chinese version of a Western medicine education over the course of 6 years, mixed together with acupuncture and herbs, and a small amount of political brainwashing. Graduated from the Beijing school in 2017, so not a very long time ago.
Great, thank you for the intro. So when you say this, I don't want to get into a debate about Chinese medicine on this channel. This is not what this is about. But I think a lot of my followers probably know my stance on that. But you are an expert. You've studied this stuff. So I think what a lot of my followers probably want to know is that what was studying in China like? Can you tell us what were some of the things that you actually had to go through? What was it like being a foreign student within a Chinese university? All kinds of stuff like that, good and bad, whatever.
Yeah. Wow. Studying in China was a miserable affair. I won't lie. I mean, I stayed there for 10 years, so I didn't hate China. I never did. I still miss some aspects of my life in China for sure, but not the university. It was things outside of the university that made life living. Generally speaking, I would say my strongest impression of what it was like to be a student in universities in China, and I attended 3. I got my language training at Beijing Normal. I went to the Shanghai and the Beijing Chinese Medicine schools. I also worked at Beijing University of Chemical Technology, Beijing University of Chinese Daly, so geography, geology, and a school in Guizhou, another university. And my synopsis of it is: you take Kafka, just sheer misery, and you take Joseph Heller, which is misery with a little bit of humor, and you mix them together. It was a bureaucratic nightmare all the time.
Can you expand on why it was so bad?
I don't know how many hours you got, but yeah.
Well, give me the highlights. Give me the best stuff, the most entertaining stuff.
Okay. So to try to keep this, to try to give a thread to this interview, I'll try to focus on some of the TCM related stuff. I started to realize things were kind of fucked up when my first year or second year in Shanghai, I was asking questions as my basic medical knowledge developed, and I'm starting to be able to ask more complicated questions. I remember this very specific conversation about an acupoint here called Hegu. And the teacher said to us in class, this can bring down a fever. And I thought, well, hey, that's great. Fevers are a major problem. You can bring down a fever just by sticking a needle in someone's hand. How? Why? And so I raised my hand and said, well, why does that work? And she looked at me like a deer in the headlights, like she never anticipated such a question. And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, let's talk about this. What is the mechanism at work? And she says, well, I guess it's because it hurts, so it brings down a fever. And I was well, wait a second now. Like it hurts. Well, doesn't every acupuncture point potentially hurt when you stick a piece of sharp metal into it? And she's like, yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe it's pain brings fevers down. And I seriously said to her, not trying to be too much of a jerk, but I said, if pain brings a fever down, why stick a needle in someone? Why not just smack them across the face? it should work. And and I asked it as a serious question. And she just said, you know what, wait until your 5th-year internship. You can ask actual doctors. I'm not really a doctor. And at that, to me, was a major light bulb moment because I thought she was. And so I decided to transfer to Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, which is the flagship institution in the entire country. It's part of this called the 211 project. It's therefore a key university. It receives much more funding from the Chinese government, and it's meant to be representative of the field. And it's in the capital. You know, if you live in China, that means a lot. And so I transferred to Beijing University of Chinese Medicine, and I ended up in a similar version. I guess the first one is the Joseph Heller aspect. It's just ridiculous. But the similar version of the same kind of story is more Kafkaesque. I always wondered why they never put foreign students and Chinese students in the same classroom. Because we were learning in Chinese, purely in Chinese, no English, but they never let us share a classroom. And finally, I guess in my 2nd year in Beijing, we had a class called, the English title would be Experimental Acupuncture. But what it meant was, it was a survey of scientific experiments into the efficacy of acupuncture that had taken place in modern China. And I was excited about this. You know, we're going to be looking at how acupuncture has stood up in modern style research. And the teacher just blathered on in class. And, as a small aside, but I think your listeners will find this interesting, especially anyone considering attending a university in China. Every single class we had, and I can't say every, I would say 90%, quite honestly, most of the professors just came in, turned on PowerPoint, and read. And that's ridiculous in any circumstance, but our PowerPoint slides and our textbooks had the exact same writing, verbatim, just copy paste. So you just essentially had someone reading the textbook to you, and they would rotate teachers with no reason. I mean, we could come in on Tuesday and have one professor for the same class. On Thursday, they switch professors. The next week, yet another professor, and they didn't even introduce themselves. Somebody had got nabbed from the hospital and told, come and teach. And they'd ask us what chapter today, and then they'd read the PowerPoint. But this class was different. This class had a stable teacher for every session. And I noticed she wasn't really explaining things. So finally, I waited for the end of class. I'm not trying to be a jerk. And when she dismissed us, I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to ask a few questions about the lecture today. And she said, no. Students don't ask questions. You're just here to hear the lecture. That's all. Next week, the same thing happened. And the third time that happened, I'm sitting in the back row, and I put my hand up and said, I wanted to ask a few questions about the lecture today. And she said, no questions. Students, listen. And I said to her, hey, you know what? I came and learned Chinese. I'm paying for this university. We're all here. We've made a lot of sacrifices to be here and study medicine. I would really appreciate if you answered my questions. I don't think you have the right not to, because we're here to become doctors. And she was furious. Like, she turned bright red. She'd never been spoken to in this way. And every Chinese student, there must have been 50 in that classroom, all of them turned their heads back. I was sitting in the back row and looked at me like they had never seen such audacity before. They were shocked. And the teacher's just sputtering and said she refused to answer my question. And I was, I didn't know what to think of it all. A week passes, we go back. We're told, you guys have a new professor. You've been split away from the Chinese class. You're not going to be with them anymore. And at the end of the day, I think that the crux of the matter was they couldn't deal with the fact that what those students had just witnessed was a disruption in the power dynamic of, in Chinese, I'm sure you heard this term, 填鸭式教育, and for your listeners, that refers to feeding a goose to make foie gras by shoving a tube down its throat. That's how Chinese people describe their own education system, if they're being honest, and they're not trying to defend the face of the country. And I had sort of torn that tube out of the mouth and said, hey, what the fuck are you putting in us, right? And she couldn't deal with it, so they broke us apart. And we could have our own world where we wouldn't basically plant ideas in the Chinese students' heads that, hey, maybe they don't have to be totally on the receiving end of this, and they had some say, they had some agency.
I like these examples. These are very, I have a lot of parallels, to be honest. I mean, when I was teaching in university, a lot of the students would come up to me and say, thank you. And I'd say, why? And they would say, thank you so much for actually talking to us. So, I mean, this
Right.
concept of wanting to ask questions or being curious was beaten out of these students. Because when I walked
Absolutely.
by and saw my fellow professors, the Chinese professors, like you said, it's verbatim PPT reading. You put on a PowerPoint and you're reading it. That's not, I mean, as soon as you learn how to teach, you learn that you're not supposed to be reading verbatim from a PowerPoint.
Right.
Yet in China,
Right.
that is the methodology. And that was an issue that I had. And another issue that I'm not shocked about is the quality of medical education that these kids might be learning. Now, maybe the source material is fine, but from what you're telling me is that the students have absolutely no opportunity to come up with conclusions on their own. Maybe ask from the teacher's experience, and then say, "Hey, why does this happen?" And then maybe become a better doctor in the future because of that. Now, this. It doesn't just stop in university. I mean, this goes all the way into the medical sphere to the point where you as a patient go in there and you're dealing with, and I'm speaking from experience as a patient in China, you go in and you deal with doctors in China that literally have no idea what they're doing. This has nothing to do with
totally agree.
Right. This has nothing to do with a race. This has nothing to do with Chinese culture. What this has to do with is the absolute toxic nature of the Chinese education system, in my opinion. And it got to a point where, like, I would go into a bone doctor. For example, when I broke my heel in Inner Mongolia, and I went to the top bone specialist hospital in Baotou, in the city that I was living in, and the doctor lit up a cigarette, and people gathered around, and he legitimately had no idea what to do. He's like, "Oh, that bone usually doesn't break.
Right.
Maybe you can put a cast on it. Maybe you can get a crutch. Right. There's a crutch store over there, right?"
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is a country that every day tells me over and over again that they're developed, that they're going to be the forefront of the future, that the West is in decline. And I'm sitting here having had better medical treatment in Laos, of all places, having had better medical treatment in Thailand, like far superior. And I'm in this country that's projecting itself as a first world power in the future, and it can't even provide the most basic medical care. When you break your knee, for example, when I broke my knee, and they're giving you antibiotics as the cure for your broken knee and trying to shoo you out the door, it makes you have a wake-up call that I better not run into any serious medical problems here in China.
Right.
So I actually wanted to ask you a couple questions. How far do you think that actually goes? Can you expand upon the fact that I'll make a claim, a lot of doctors in China are not real doctors. Can you expand on that at all?
Yeah, a lot. Where to start? I'll start with a funny little joke. I lived in a small city in Guizhou. That's where I first landed in China.
I love
it's called Tongren.
Tongren, I've been there.
Yo, it's lovely, man. I'll maybe never be able to see it again, but I miss it. So, it's a small, by Chinese standards, a tiny city. Back then it was like 300,000. Had a couple of hospitals, and I knew the Peace Corps kids out there and a couple other foreigners. I was teaching English with a job that my friend in Peace Corps helped me get. And so, Guizhou, man, the street food is delicious, but it will get you diarrhea every couple of days. Oh my goodness. And, people had to go to the hospital quite often, and they reported all the time. They'd be told, "You have no problem." Like, you have no problem. Like, someone's shitting their brains out. You have no problem. And there's a tragic side to this. A year or two after I left, an American Peace Corps volunteer died from complications, most likely from food poisoning. So, but the funny aspect of it, it's not that funny after I just said that. But was everybody go in there and be like, "Do you have a problem?" Most of us at that point had pretty poor Chinese. And all we could understand was a few things. And the doctors would be like, 没有 你没有问题啊, 没有问题啊, which for your listeners who don't speak Chinese means like, you have no problem, you have nothing. But 没有, it sounds just like the English Mayo Clinic. So we just started to call it the Mayo Clinic because you go there and it's just Mayo.
Good. That's good.
Oh my goodness, that's a long time ago. But I'll give some. I have some, I think, examples that your listeners will find interesting. To start with Chinese medicine, anyone who has even a passing interest will know that one of Chinese medicine's sort of favorite 口号, it's like it's slogans for promoting itself, is that Western medicine just treats diseases. Chinese medicine treats the person. It has individually tailored treatment that takes into account your personal problem based on not your symptoms, but your internal situation that has caused them to arise. In Chinese, 西治病，中医治人. And so we were looking forward to learning this. I mean, it's what excited us. It's what made us throw in all those years and all that effort. And finally, in my internship year, we show up in an acupuncture clinic, and I noticed that the doctor's giving every freaking patient the exact same treatment, and they're turning patients over. It's like making a Big Mac speed. I'm not even kidding. We're talking about like 2 minutes intake, throw some needles in them next. It's crazy. And I said to the doc, who was he was a young guy. He was pretty loquacious. He was conversational. After we finished, I said, hey, man, you just gave everybody the exact same treatment. Isn't Chinese medicine supposed to be individually tailored? And he laughed and he said, well, yeah, you're right, but we can't do it that way. And I said, why not? Is it because the patients are there's just too many, you don't have time? He says, no, that's not the problem at all. The problem is like this. The government has a standard treatment for every disease, heart disease, intestinal problem, whatever it is. These are the points you use. And if I make a diagnosis of a person and I choose points different from that standard chart, then if I treat the person successfully, I don't get any reward. But God forbid, I made my own deviation from the standard and that person didn't get better or they got worse, then the responsibility is all mine. And therefore, the only safe thing I could do for my career is to just blindly copy this sheet, like making fast food for the rest of my life. Because then, even if I give this person a treatment and they die on the table because I followed the standard protocol, I was not responsible. He told me, you'd run into the odd doctor who's not trying to protect the face of China, and they're not trying to project this mystical sort of TCM aura of, we've got it all figured out. You'll run into the honest, straightforward people from time to time. And that was one of them. And he was just like, hey, man, this is the bullshit we do to keep our heads above water in this career. If your listeners include China watchers, serious China watchers, I'm sure they're aware that in addition to, the immense pressure a person faces in establishing a career in China, like a white collar career, such as a doctor, on top of that, in medicine, murdering doctors and nurses is common. Beating the shit out of them is also common. Like, to the degree that we have protocols in a hospital, you can't give a patient boiling water to drink, which in China, not in the West, but in China, that's weird. Like, if you refuse to give people hot water to drink, but that's what people drink, especially in the winter in Beijing. Certain furniture wasn't allowed because it could be weaponized. And in my third year in Beijing, there was a situation where a belligerent patient began physically attacking a female doctor. A man was attacking a female doctor. He had waited for her to get off work, and he began beating her in the main entrance foyer of a large hospital in front of 2 security guards. And the only person who got involved was my French classmate, who's like 5'3" and tackled the assailant to the ground. And only after he started dealing with the assailant did the security guards step up. So hospitals are chaotic in China. They're a fucking mess. Yeah.
Can you actually? That reminded me of just some hospital experiences, but without delving too much into that, can you talk about like some of the sanitary conditions? Because that's something that shocks a lot of people when they even travel to China and they get like a funny stomach or something and they go to the doctors. What was it like? Studying and working in the hospitals. Why is there no soap and things like this?
I can't fathom it. Well, why there's no soap, I think it's just embezzling the funds of the hospital, cutting corners whenever they can, throw a little bit more money in your pocket. As for the sanitation, every single bookshelf in the library in Beijing's library, I'm kid you not, every single bookshelf had an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper tacked to it that said, please do not spit in here. Now, the fact that you're in a medical school in the 2010s and you have to remind people not to spit on every bookshelf just shows the level of sanitation is extremely low. And in that library, I swear to you, there was never a bar of soap ever in any of the bathrooms. And again, we're learning Chinese medicine, Western medicine mixed together. We're working with microscopes. We're studying germ theory. This is not the 1700s.
Right, that's what I wanted to ask. Is there no concept of germs? Connect.
It doesn't connect.
Right.
We foreign students were upset about this. There wasn't a place to wash your hands in the cafeteria, right? You could just rinse them in water. That was it. And so we raised some issues with the administration. And we would be told by the administration, we don't have money. We're a poor university. And these guys were parking 7 Series gold BMWs in front of the building, more than one.
Sounds about right.
Embezzlement. And finally, they just got us some. So for the International Students College building, first floor, that's it. It's all face. Now, to take it back into the hospitals, same thing. The 2 main hospitals I spent time in, the China-Japan Friendship Hospital was a much wealthier hospital. They did have soap. The 3rd affiliated hospital of Beijing University of Chinese Medicine did not. And I swear to you, there was a bathroom, a men's room that I saw over the course of 3 years probably. It looked like somebody threw a hand grenade in there. Or more likely, it was a patient or a family member of something bad happened to them. And rather than beat up a nurse or doctor, my guess is they just went full on Bruce Lee on all the apparatus in the bathroom and just kicked it to shit. I mean, it was insane, like stall walls hanging at 45 degrees angles. It was nuts. It never got repaired. Now, going into the clinical rooms, I have a story that I think I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. And it's so shocking. I don't expect people to believe me. But one day we're making rounds in that hospital, 3rd affiliated hospital of the UCM. And I'm just kind of spaced out. We're just following a doctor around, going to these inpatient rooms with 4 people per room. They're very small rooms. Like I'm sure a lot of wealthy Americans have walk-in clothes closets that are bigger than this inpatient room. And it's got 4 metal cots crammed against the wall, just enough for 4 patients to sleep and a few people to stand in the middle area. It's dim. It's just a grimy place. It's grim. And I'm kind of spaced out, making rounds can get boring. And I noticed this like shape like a flower petal on the wall in front of me, dark brown. And I'm just, just my mind kind of latches onto it. Why is that there? It looked almost like someone daubed it with a paintbrush. And then my mind's follow up. These old hospitals built with Stalinist architecture, the ceilings are very high. So I follow up like another 3 feet. Hey, there's another one, another 3 feet. I'm getting close to the ceiling. There's another one. And I look all the way up to the ceiling above me and there's a pattern of them. And then I realize that shit is arterial blood spray that had splattered onto the walls and made it all the way up to the ceiling. And it had been left there. And it had never been cleaned off and painted over as it should be. Right. No question. And the scariest but in a lot of ways very poetic and illustrative of what the CCP's way of grinding their population down has done is that, the patients who come to that hospital and they're in there as inpatients lying in the back all day, what do they get to contemplate? They get to contemplate the splattered blood of a previous, probably dead patient on the ceiling all day long. And nobody who's walking in and out of there, doctors, nurses, cleaning staff, support staff, family members, is thinking to raise a stink and be like, get the fucking blood spray off the wall. Because it's just not my problem. It's not my blood, and this society is not my responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm just passing through.
You, in our correspondence when we were chatting, you did mention about some other splatters, which I thought could be quite entertaining.
Oh,
why don't you?
Let's tell that. So, oh goodness, in 2009, 2010, the wintertime, the transition between those 2 years. Lucky me, I'll get to share everything for the whole internet to see, but it's worth it. I got prostatitis. Which was not fun. And I'll start. I first went to the Beijing Normal University campus clinic, and it was like bare concrete floors, chip paint on the walls that probably hadn't been, painted since the 1970s. Dark green, looked like those old trains you used to see, and like a single bare 40-watt bulb. I mean, like out of a movie, man, an interrogation room. And I described my symptoms to the guy, and he's like, that sounds like prostatitis. So I get up, I had to climb up on like a metal table, as humiliating. But what are you going to do? You're sick, and pull my damn pants down and get on all fours. And this dude jams his gloved finger up my ass to get some prostate fluid out. No, I'll tell you, I've seen some movies where like prostate milking is a fetish, and I don't understand it, man, because that was painful. Just squeeze and squeeze. It was miserable. And they put on a microscope, and they saw signs of inflammation and decided, yes, you do have prostate inflammation. So I got sent to this. It was like #3 hospital of Beijing. Just everybody called it Beijing Disan Yuan. It's enormous, and it felt like going into a train station, like one of those massive train stations. Just Renshan Renhai, people everywhere. Again, the dim lights. I don't know what's with not paying the power bill. It's just so dim. It's filthy. It's like a castle. You could fit 100,000 people in there easily. And I make my way to the andrology clinic, and I paid a little extra money to get an expert. And the so-called, Zhuan Jiahao, an established doctor. And I explained to him everything that was happening. By then I could speak quite a bit of Chinese. And I said to him, in addition to going through that ordeal again of getting my prostate milked, I would like you to run a bacterial culture, because if I do have bacterial prostatitis, I would like to know that I'm using the right antibiotics. And he looked at me furiously. He's like, no, he literally told me, like, I'm the expert. You got the expert doctor. So I'm telling you, I'm not going to do a bacterial culture. And, but he said he would still check to confirm whether I had prostatitis or not. So again, man, very, very just utterly inhuman, just jam it in, squeeze some shit out of my prostate and put it on a slide. And then they send me off with this little slide with a piece of glass on top to find the room where they're going to run the analysis on it. And so now, having just had my butthole reamed by this like torture doctor, I'm wandering again through the maze, and I had to. It was a snowy
with
day.
Your own sample.
With my own prostate juice.
Only people in China will know that you have to walk around with your own sample.
Oh my goodness! This place was city-sized. I had to go in between these boiler buildings and steams coming out of the walls, snow and slush everywhere. I finally find the place. It was quite far away. I take a number, and they tell me, okay, you see that metal box over there? When they call your number, go in there and then give them the slide. So okay. It was weird. It was about the size of an old phone booth, but just stainless steel box with a door on it affixed to one of the walls. So finally my number comes, and obediently I go into this box, this, again, phone booth sized, close the door behind me. It's lit. And there is a single foam core color printout of a Chinese woman in a bikini on all fours, looking back over her shoulder on the wall. That's it.
This is such an aesthetic.
There's stains everywhere. I mean, some of these dudes.
She was a popular lady.
She was a popular lady, and there was like stains like 2 meters high on the wall, like taller than me. It was just anywhere you looked, there was splatter marks. And I realized,
oh my gosh,
clinic. This is where guys who have low sperm counts come, right?
Right.
And they're being told, go in there and look at the lady in the bikini and put it in the test tube. And like in a speakeasy in a movie, right in front of me is this the grate that the bouncer opened. Like, who is it? And they waited a good long time to open that thing. So I'm just standing in this filthy room that nobody has ever, clearly in years, wiped the walls down. And I mean, I really just want to pause for a second for your listeners. We're going through this COVID pandemic, and we can get to this later on if you want. I just want to say, this is a hospital in the capital of China.
No, please mention this.
11 years ago, a mere 11 years ago,
right,
where I am in, let's put the jokes aside, I am in a phone booth of uncleaned. I'm not joking. That's real. That's fucking real. And finally, so that door opens and I hand it over. And this is actually relevant to everything about the Chinese medical system, education system, and tangentially COVID. Again, that expert that I had to pay extra money for, he refused to do a bacterial culture. So even after all that ordeal, all they were doing was looking for signs of inflammation in the prostate fluid. They were not looking for the specific bacteria. So I went back to him. He gave me a prescription for strong antibiotics. I went home and I was like, you know what? I just don't feel right about this. So I had a friend in medical school already, in the same medical school I later attended, and I called her up. She's a Russian woman, and I said, you're now interned in the hospital. Is there a chance you can go through Guanxi and find me an andrology doctor who's willing to do a bacterial culture? And she did. She came through a few days later. She had me come in. That doctor was actually much nicer. And just to show what Guanxi does for you in China, and you'll relate to this, and this is also hilarious but disturbing. This dude had the kindness to tell me before he shoved his finger up my ass, take a deep breath and relax. Because the other two, I was just a number. So it was just, boom. I mean, it hurt. This legitimately hurt. And it's humiliating and it's disturbing. This dude, he had that basic that you would expect from a doctor to do what you can to reduce a person's suffering. And it made a big difference just being reminded, hey man, I'm about to go in.
Yeah, it's the little things that really count, because like I'm thinking back on the bribes that we had to pay to get a doctor to properly look at my wife when she was pregnant, and the difference between paying that exorbitantly expensive bribe and not doing that is the difference between your kid being potentially damaged and you having like a slightly more comfortable experience. It's insane.
Right. Yeah. And so the end of this story is, lo and behold, the bacteria that I had, and I don't know if I got it from swimming in rivers or what, was MRSA, MRSA.
Wow.
Multiple streptococcus, however you pronounce it. Yeah. A superbug. And so just throwing any random antibiotic was not going to help.
No.
And that expert doctor who like not just refused, but angrily scolded me for asking for a bacterial culture was absolutely wrong. And thankfully, I lucked out and I found the relationship. I had the Guanxi and I had the good sense to demand the culture. So I got over this illness.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good ending to a very grim story. I mean, the real alarming thing is the overuse of antibiotics, overprescription of antibiotics in China is leading to horrifically dangerous strains of bacteria. And that is not something that's like 100 years off. I think that's something that could be in the very near future. But it's somewhat related to that. I actually wanted to ask you, we've talked about the cleanliness. We've talked about the corruption within hospitals. We've talked a little bit about the just horrific education system, medical education system. How much of this is related to the outbreak of COVID? And I ask this because a lot of people out there came away from the coronavirus outbreak having a more positive view of, not of China, but of the Chinese way of dealing with things, right? And what I like to tell people is that it's the Chinese way of dealing with things, it's the nitty-gritty details that you're mentioning here that led to that happening in the first place, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
With only the caveat that I don't want, who knows if anybody is going to quote this interview. I don't want to. No. I don't want anyone to think you or I are being like, we got the answer.
No. I'm talking about just the medical, the mishaps that happen in China. How are they related?
I'll put it this way. I absolutely 100% think so. I was not shocked when COVID broke out. Here's a story from early in COVID. I was actually supposed to be in China right at its explosion in Wuhan last year.
Wow.
And so what happened was I was going to go visit one of my teachers for Chunjie, Guonian, at the Chinese New Year in Jilin province, someone I'm still very close to. And I found out that the plane tickets to go before the holiday were really too expensive. So I called her up and I said, hey, how come on the 8th day after New Year's, the 8th lunar calendar day? How about that? So I had pushed my plane ticket back quite a bit. And during this time, that's when COVID is blowing up. The WHO under Dr. Tedros, I really can't pronounce his full name, and China themselves are insisting that there's no interhuman transmission. But the news just keeps getting weirder every day. And so I called up my friends who were still in China because I knew them because they're still studying medicine there. And they started to tell me, don't believe what you're seeing on the news. We've already got infections in Beijing with doctors and nurses right at the very beginning. So I canceled my plane ticket and I managed to save my ass, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I could have been there Lord knows how long. And so from the very beginning, what my friends in the medical establishment were reporting and what the news and the WHO, all under the influence of Chinese propaganda, was reporting was different. And that's just, I think Chinese people understand that too, because there's now so many people online who are beating the propaganda drum, but they were furious when Dr. Wen Liang died, because they recognized that this doctor stood up and pointed a finger at a problem that they all know exists. And they all know it exists because people wouldn't be murdering doctors and nurses left and right if there wasn't an enormous pent-up rage at the medical establishment.
Yeah, that makes
and now
sense.
Specifically to COVID and how something like this could arise. And I don't tend to subscribe to the bio-terror, bio-warfare scenario. I don't think they did this on purpose. I absolutely subscribe to the lab accidents. And from day one. Now, why? Like, I have an American friend here in Taipei who trained chemist in university, and he became an English teacher. And the reason he became an English teacher is that what he saw working in China made him lose faith in the medical research establishment, because he went there straight after school to work. He ends up in Shanghai, China's flagship modern city, other than Hong Kong. Now that they've destroyed it, Shanghai's the flagship. And he's working in a biochem lab, and they're working with RNA. And evidently, RNA can be quite a persistent chemical. And so if you're doing an experiment with it, you can't be confident that after you clean your lab equipment, your tables, whatever, that it's all gone. And so to deal with that, there's a chemical called RNase, which specifically breaks down RNA, and it's crucial to use in a biochem lab, because the only way to have a new experiment that's not going to be tainted by leftover RNA from a previous experiment, to guarantee that, is to use this chemical or one like it. And he realized they weren't using it, and started to ask his colleagues, maybe they had something else, a Chinese chemical he hadn't heard of because he was educated plus, but they didn't. And he decides this is a big problem, and he goes to the lab director and explains to the guy what he's seeing, and says, hey, I think we need RNase. And this lab director of a biochem lab in Shanghai, not more than 10 years ago, did not know what RNase was. It's just, I know what it was even before this conversation from college. And furthermore, of course, due to the face issues, became upset and refused to integrate this very cheap, simple chemical into their protocols, and then began to, treat my friend more and more poorly, make him feel unwelcome in the laboratory for having the temerity to speak to his employer and suggest that the employer might not know everything.
I mean, that culture of mianzi is the downfall of a lot of situations like this, because if you are not willing to make adjustments or changes based on someone's criticism, then nothing goes anywhere. And I guess just to make everything simple for people that don't quite understand, if you're working with RNA in a lab, you would need to use this chemical, and I'm specifically in a Wuhan lab, like the bio lab. You would need to use this chemical to be able to wash the RNA off, right? That's what you're insinuating. Okay.
And we saw the State Department memo from a couple of years ago where they sent people down to the Wuhan lab, and they were just shocked at the unpreparedness, the low level of training, and the understaffing in that lab. I mean, that's right there. That's
just flies right in the face of what the WHO said when they said that the lab was, following protocol very well, and that it was extremely unlikely to have come from there.
I kept talking to Mattias, and actually he dropped quite the bombshell, and I decided that it would be best if it was its own entire episode, because I actually was not expecting what he told me. It's a big, big claim, and I actually think there's a lot of weight behind it. So stay tuned for the next episode. I'll try to release it pretty soon after this one. And thank you guys for supporting me on Patreon. It's the only way that we can get this done, and I really appreciate having a dialogue with you guys every single day. You guys can send me private messages, and it's just an awesome, awesome place to connect and support the channel. So I appreciate it. Patreon.com/Lao86. Thank you so much, Laowiners, and I'll catch you on the next one.